The Xylos Pillar assembly hall was a cavernous, high-G pressure cooker that smelled of ozone and alien pheromones, the kind of place where diplomatic immunity felt about as thick as a cheap vac-suit. Archivist Silas Thorne hauled himself up from his chair, his joints popping with the dry, rhythmic protest of an old-model synth. Around the table, the blue-skinned hegemony elite and the chitinous, multi-limbed nightmares from the Krell-thorax sectors stopped their subvocal chattering. Even the gas forms, drifting like bioluminescent waste in the rafters, dialed back their shimmer. Thorne looked at them with eyes that had seen too much dirt and not enough light. His face was a topographical map of scars and radiation burns. He'd spent 5 years playing the patient monkey for the Astrum Hegemony, absorbing their high-altitude arrogance and gilded insults. "The clock's run out," Thorne said, his voice a gravelly rasp filtered through years of cheap synthetic cigars. "I'm done listening to the sound of my own species being measured for a coffin." He was 58, but in the harsh ultraviolet light of the pillar, he looked like a relic from a pre-jump era. "Earth is packing its bags. This circus is over." Archon Kolzarith, a spindly freak of nature draped in purple scales and 4 twitching arms, let out a wet, rhythmic sound that passed for a laugh. "Archivist, sit down. You're letting your primitive impulses override your logic." Thorne didn't sit. He reached out and snagged the data slate Kolzarith had left unlocked, a sloppy amateur move. He flicked through the encrypted files, the parasitic code revealing a series of Black Ops directives to asset strip 3 human colonies. "This isn't logic, Archon," Thorne rumbled, his voice dropping into a dangerous, low-frequency growl. "This is a blueprint for a massacre. You're planning to gut our settlements while we're still sitting at your table." The council erupted into a twitchy, multi-species mess of defensive posturing. Kolzaritha's scales turned a bruised, shameful shade of indigo. "Theoretical projections," the Archon spat. "Every contingency must be mapped." Elena Vane, the second ambassador, stood up beside Thorne, her hand hovering near the concealed tech rig at her hip. She looked like she'd been carved out of cold-rolled steel. "Funny how your contingencies always involve human body counts," she said, her voice cutting through the noise like a high-freck blade. "We're the ones who plugged the breach when the Kyberon Ravagers were tearing through your trade lanes. We bled for your margins." Kruval, a bloated mass of gray cellular pulp, waved a dismissive tentacle that hit the table with a wet thud. "You were fodder. A temporary tactical convenience. Without our tech tithe, you'd be back on your dirtball eating each other." Thorne shoved the slate back across the table with a violent scrape of metal on stone. 20 years we've spent begging for a seat in this airless vault. 20 years of you feeding us the dregs and calling it progress." He stared down the table, meeting every set of inhuman eyes with a cold, predatory focus. "Humanity's done asking for permission. Consider the contract void. We're out." The room turned into a riot of screeching mandates and wet hisses. Threats of trade sanctions and military blockades were hurled like grenades. Thorne didn't flinch. He just raised one hand, and the rest of the human delegation stood up with the synchronized precision of a combat unit. They packed their gear with a clinical, terrifying quiet. "You're making a terminal error," clicked the Krell representative, his translator box spitting out the words in a series of digital pops. "Your colonies are unprotected meat. You'll be picked clean within a lunar cycle." Silas Thorne let a jagged, ugly smile pull at the corners of his mouth. "We've taken a lot more from your databases than just insults, you insectoid dick." Elena Vane handed him an ebony-case transmitter. Thorne keyed the sequence. Across the hall, the glowing holographic displays flickered, bled static, and then died. Every byte of human navigational data, every colony coordinate, and every trade route was zeroed out, purged by a viral wipe that moved faster than their firewalls could blink. "We're our own security now," Thorne said into the sudden, ringing silence. "If you want to talk trade again, find us in the dark. But bring something better than a knife to the table." They marched out in a tight wedge, boots echoing against the obsidian floors with a rhythmic, industrial thrum. Behind them, the council sat in a state of catastrophic shock. Kruval's pulpy mass wobbled with a desperate bravado. "They'll be back," she wheezed. "When the Ravagers start knocking, they'll come crawling." Only Theoh, the youngest blueskin in the room, looked at the empty doorway with a sense of genuine dread. "I don't think they're coming back," he whispered. "I think we just realized the tiger wasn't on a leash." In the pressurized chill of the corridor, Thorne sucked in a lungful of filtered air. It tasted like blood and victory. "Pop the flare," he told Elena. "The Fenris Protocol is live." Deep in the bedrock of Geneva, in a bunker that smelled of gun oil and high-end cooling fans, Earth's real power sat in the dark. High Admiral Cassian Draken stood at the center of the command pit, her uniform as sharp as a razor, her hair a jagged streak of silver against the monitors. Behind her, a countdown clock was ticking toward 0 with a relentless, mechanical click. "Thorne's clear," she said, the words vibrating through the floor. The Fenris Protocol just hit the fan. A hum of adrenaline-fueled energy swept the room. For 10 years they had lived a lie, building a shadow military in the cracks of the hegemony's bureaucracy. Now, the mask was coming off. The heavy blast doors hissed open to admit Dr. Alistair Sterling. He looked like he'd spent a month in a combat zone, greasy hair, lab coat stained with coolant, eyes bloodshot from too much screen time. He slammed into a seat next to War Master Santiago. "The kinetic shields, they're green across the board," he rasped, shaking. Santiago, a block of scarred muscle who looked like he'd been built for a war that hadn't happened yet, didn't blink. "Will they hold up against council-grade beam fire?" Sterling let out a dark, ragged laugh. "We're talking multilayered ablative plating and localized gravity wells. They could fire a sun at us and we'd just sweat a little." The clock hit 0. Silas Thorne's face flickered onto the main screen, grainy and distorted by long-range encryption. "The hegemony thinks we're bluffing," he said, his image ghosting in the static. "They think we're a backwater race with a loud mouth." Draken stepped into the blue light of the holotank. "Let's show them the teeth. Initiate the Exodus eclipse." In hidden shipyards carved into dead moons and subterranean hangars beneath the Antarctic ice, the machinery of a civilization moved into high gear. Stealth frigates, built with salvaged alien tech and human-engineered brutality, were fueled and armed. On Mars and Europa, the red dust and frozen crust were shattered by the activation of planetary defense batteries that had been silent for a decade. In a hardened facility in the Arizona desert, Dr. Maya Voss watched her techs weld high-output thrust modules onto the skeletons of massive transport ships. These were black-budget engines, illegal modifications of Council designs that could burn through hyperspace 30% faster than anything the hegemony owned. "Are we on the clock?" her lead tech asked. "The clock is the only thing we have left," Voss replied, her eyes reflecting the blue arc welders. "The Council's going to find our territory empty by the time they finish their morning coffee." Aboard the heavy cruiser Aegis, Commander Elias Thorne felt the hum of the ship's reactor through his boots. The orders on his screen were marked with the highest security clearance. "Navcom, pivot to Epsilon." "Full burn," he barked. "We're going off the map." His tactical officer, Sarah Kane, looked at the sensor ghosts. "Epsilon's outside the treaty zone, Commander. If the hegemony catches us there—" "The treaties are dead," Sarah, Elias said, staring at the black void on the screen. "We're not asking for permission to survive anymore. We're bringing our people home." In the high-security vaults of New York, the Secretary-General spoke to a closed session of the world's power players. "The Astrum Hegemony has been harvesting our potential for 20 years and calling it a favor," he said, his voice echoing like a gunshot. "Today, the bill comes due." Fear was a palpable scent in the room. "The Council has cruisers, planetary killers." A minister whined. Santiago stood up, his presence filling the room like a looming threat. "We've got a few killers of our own. They just haven't seen them yet because we were waiting for the right moment to pull the trigger." Across the human sphere, the signal went out. Ships changed transponders, hidden weapon pods deployed from the hulls of cargo haulers. The message was a hard-coded broadcast: "The shield is up. The Vanguard is here. Stand by for extract." In the Geneva pit, Draken watched the star map. Human signatures were vanishing from Council sensors by the thousands. "Phase 1 is a ghost," she whispered. "We've got 6 months before they realize the bank is empty." Sterling looked up from his terminal, his fingers dancing over the keys. "And the Aetherium?" Their entire infrastructure runs on the stuff we mine. Draken's face was a study in cold, calculated malice. Exactly. We're going to teach them the true meaning of a supply chain crisis. On Xylos Prime, the Hegemony's central spire was a monument to over-designed luxury. The council sat in their elevated pods, waiting for the human apology that wasn't coming. A pathetic display, Kruval gurgled. They'll be begging for a trade deal before the week is out. Thalawith watched the chronometer. 2 weeks had passed. The human docks were empty, the warehouses silent. The jump gates were as quiet as a graveyard. Kolzarith strode in, his purple scales looking dull and sickly. The humans have gone dark. Every sensor, every beacon, every data link, severed. Krixar's mandibles clicked with a sharp, staccato fury. They are children throwing a tantrum. We need to remind them who owns the air they breathe. And how do we do that? Thalawith asked, his voice thin. Warships, Krixar hissed. To Earth. A surgical strike to the capital. Based on what? Thalawith challenged. They haven't fired a shot. They've just stopped being here. My refineries are stalled. Kruval shrieked. The ore shipments have stopped. This is an act of economic war. Kolzarith raised his hands for a silence that felt heavy and wrong. We freeze their accounts. We lock their jump rights. We starve them out until they realize the galaxy is a very cold place for a species on its own. The vote was a landslide of arrogance. Only Thalawith kept his hand down. The mandate was signed. Humanity was to be treated like an infection. The news burned through the relay stations. Most species laughed. Humans were just a blip on the radar, a footnote in the history of the hegemony. In a dive bar on Xylos, a Vardian merchant spat into his drink. Apes had too much mouth, he told his green-skinned associate. Let them stay in their little solar system. They'll be eating each other by winter. His associate, a four-eyed scavenger, looked at the empty screen. But who's going to fix the graviton drives? The human techs were the only ones who knew how to tweak the old models. At the War Sanctum, Overlord Vorgath, a crimson-skinned monster who'd forgotten more about war than most species ever knew, stared at the dead monitors. Where's the human fleet? He rumbled. In stealth, Overlord. They've dropped off the long-range arrays. Vorgath let out a low, predatory growl. I don't like silence. Silence means someone is taking aim. The rot started in the fiscal citadel. Small glitches at first, human-built software modules failing without updates, human-refined materials running low. Then the big stuff started to break. Construction drones stalled. Entertainment networks went dark as human content creators pulled their licenses. Minister Vixplex waved a tentacle. Minor inconveniences. We'll find other labors. But the inconveniences became a landslide. 2 months. 3. The silence from Earth was starting to feel like a countdown. Maybe, Thalawith suggested during a closed session, we should send an envoy. Not a threat. An inquiry. Kruval's laughter was a wet, disgusting sound. An inquiry? To those vermin? They'll come crawling when the hunger hits. And if they don't? Kolzarith's eyes were like shards of glass. Physics doesn't care about pride. They need us more than we need them. It's math. But the math was rigged. A junior officer burst in, his eyes wide with panic. Krixar snatched the report from his hands. His compound eyes flickered. The Kyberon Ravagers, they've wiped out a secondary outpost. Total loss. No survivors. Where were the sector guards? Kolzarith demanded. Krixar's voice was a dry, hollow rattle. The humans, they always held that sector. We never bothered to station our own ships there. The alarms on the defense station were a high-pitched scream of electronic pain. Overlord Vorgath hammered his fist into the console. Report! Draxvel, a senior Krell officer, pointed at the red blossoms spreading across the tactical display. 4 more outposts hit. The Ravagers are tearing through our soft underbelly. Casualties in the thousands. Vorgath looked at the holes in their defense. They were perfectly aligned with the sectors the humans used to patrol. Send a high-priority burst to Earth. Tell them to resume their treaty obligations immediately. 3 months of silence had turned into a bloodbath. The Council wasn't annoyed anymore. They were bleeding. The reply from Earth flickered onto the screen 10 minutes later. It wasn't a diplomatic cable. It was a one-line block of text: the Solari Vanguard is offline. Figure it out yourselves. Sirariva, the merchant guild boss, stood in a warehouse that felt like a tomb. The air was cold, the shelves empty of the high-end Earth gear that kept her business in the black. My credits are worthless if I have nothing to sell, she whispered to her clerk. Earth isn't picking up the phone, boss. We've sent 20 pings. Total blackout. Sirariva looked at the shipyard. The human mechanics, those greasy geniuses who could make a dying reactor sing, were gone. The Hegemony's ships were starting to fail, their complex systems drifting toward catastrophic entropy. The corporate lord stormed the high chamber. We're losing billions, screamed Krelzan, his limbs jerking with stress. My assembly lines have stalled. We need human components. The tech core is paralyzed. Dr. Salmira added. Human scientists solve problems we don't even have words for. We're backsliding into the Stone Age. Kolzaretha's purple scales were a pale, sickly gray. They've locked the door. They're not answering. Then bribe them. Krelzan shrieked. Give them whatever they want. Credits, planets, slaves. Kruval was still clinging to her rotting pride. We do not pay for loyalty from the lower tiers. The hammer fell 10 minutes later. Thelwich walked in, his face like a death mask. The Aetherium shipment. It didn't show up. Again. The silence that followed was absolute. Aetherium was the fuel that kept the jump gates open. Without it, the Hegemony was just a collection of isolated, dying systems. Reserves. Kolzareth whispered. 6 months, Thelwich said. Then the galaxy goes dark. In the cold gloom of the chamber, the Council finally realized they hadn't been ruling an empire. They'd been riding a host. We didn't just use them, Krixar rasped. We depended on them. Kolzareth looked at his hands. Prepare a fast courier. We're going to Earth. And we're going to beg. What are the terms? Anything they want, the Archon said. Before the lights go out. The celestial cord sat at the edge of the Sol system, looking like a discarded toy. Captain Zornlux was sweating through his flight suit. Signal coming in, his comms officer said, his voice shaking. High Admiral Draken appeared on the main screen. She looked like she was made of flint and cold water. You're in human space, Council ship. State your business before we start shooting. We wish to reopen negotiations, Zornlux stammered. Send the text, Draken said, her voice a flat, dangerous monotone. We'll review it when we have time. I have direct authority to speak to your government. Zornlux cried. Send the text, Draken repeated, her eyes cold. If you move 1 kilometer closer, we'll turn your ship into a cloud of glowing gas. The screen went black. Zornlux felt the crushing weight of 20 years of human resentment pressing against his hull. In the Geneva bunker, Thorne looked at the Council's offer. They're offering us everything. Full trade, no tribute, autonomy. They are terrified. Sterling laughed, a harsh, nicotine-stained sound. They're offering us the things they stole from us? That's rich. They want the Aetherium, Santiago said, leaning back. They're literally running on fumes. Draken nodded. Let them sweat a little longer. Let them see what a world without us looks like. On Xylos, Sage Xeno14 presented his final report. His tentacles were trembling. We've searched the sector. Aetherium is a human monopoly. There's nowhere else to get it. Impossible. Kruval roared. Xeno14 pulled up the data. The sources are in high-gravity zones, radioactive belts, and deep crusts. Our ships can't handle the stress. We don't have the shielding. Only the humans do. Kolzareth slumped in his seat. So we're at their mercy. It's worse than that, Xeno14 whispered, pulling up a file marked with a pre-stellar sigil. I've been digging into the deep archives. Earth wasn't a discovery. It was a recovery. What are you talking about? Krixar demanded. The citadel of the firstborn, Xeno 14 said, showing a map that was 10,000 years old. The humans were here before us. They were the ones who terraformed the sector. They didn't evolve into space, they returned to it. The council sat in a stunned, suffocating silence. At the Elysium station, Silas Thorne addressed his fleet. The council is begging for a deal. What do we tell them? Tell them to wait, Sarah Kane said, her hand on her sidearm. Let them learn the value of the people they called apes. Silas Thorne stepped onto the bridge. The wait is over. We've built our own path while they were busy looking down their noses at us. We've got tech they can't even dream of. We're not the junior partners anymore. He looked at the fleet. We go back as the adults in the room. News hit the colonies like a shockwave, full council membership. Chancellor Lydia Vance looked at the tactical display. They are desperate enough to offer us the throne. But we've got our own fleet shadowed over their homeworld. We're not taking the throne, we're taking the lead. The Hegemony tried one last play, sending 60 warships to Earth as a show of force. But as they dropped out of warp, the system lit up like a Christmas tree. Hundreds of human stealth frigates decloaked, their railguns locked on. Admiral Julian Mercer appeared on their screens. You have 30 minutes to leave human space. If you're still here at minute 31, we start the harvest. The council fleet turned tail and ran. Commander Varnex's report was blunt: we're outclassed. They have the tech of the firstborn. We're fighting ghosts. Kolzareth broke. Offer them the lead, he commanded. They are the firstborn. Our own history proves it. We were just squatters in their backyard. In the Geneva Hall, the treaty was signed. Chancellor Vance didn't take the crown. We don't want an empire, she said, her voice like cold iron. We want a community. But from now on, humanity is the one writing the rules. In the quiet after the storm, Silas Thorne looked at the stars. We could have burned them all, Silas, a captain said. Thorne let out a tired, cynical laugh. Maybe. But that's a council move. We're better than that. We're the Vanguard. We build things. Far out in the black, new signals were being picked up. New species, new threats. And humanity, the firstborn, the Solari Vanguard, was waiting. Not with a threat, but with a hard-won hand of partnership.